Folks, welcome to Guests and Gusto, SCAD's virtual series of conversations, lectures, and digital content. My name is Matthew Maloney, and I am the Associate Chair of Animation over here at SCAD Atlanta. And very delighted to be with you today, broadcasting to the entire institution. And it is truly my pleasure to introduce an individual who's really becoming very rapidly one of my favorite people, Mark McCray. Mark is a senior manager of programming operations for Adult Swim, which is a division of Time Warner Media. He's an award-winning television writer and has been in broadcasting industry for more than 20 years. Mark has a passion for programming strategy, animation, comic books, and of course, Saturday morning cartoons. Prior to his work at Adult Swim, he worked as a television programmer for Cartoon Network, and he was a key member of the team that launched the Boomerang Network. Today, Mark is going to take us on a nostalgic journey back in time to the joyful days of Saturday morning cartoons as he shares entertaining insight from his popular book, The Best Saturdays of Our Lives, which chronicles the origins of Saturday morning animated programming. It's as much fun as it sounds like it is. In fact, recently, Mark launched the Best Saturdays of Our Lives podcast, which is great. It's updated regularly and covers a lot of the content. If you like what you're going to hear today, you should definitely check it out. He's been interviewed on Adult Swim's daily streaming web series, William Street Swap Shop. He's been a guest on the podcast Drawn, the Story of Animation, as well as the Adult Swim podcast. And he was a featured guest speaker at the 2018 SCAD Animation Fest. And I'm very excited about the presentation today. In fact, we're going to have time today for a Q&A. So afterwards, please stick around for some questions. Get those questions ready. And just to kick things off, we're going to start with a question. We're going to have a poll question. It's going to be delivered to you right now. This is we're going to use this same device for our questions later on in the program today. Today's poll question: what significant career accomplishments of Mark's is most interesting to you? What do you want to hear more about? All right. Launching the Boomerang Network, programming for Cartoon Network, being senior manager of Adult Swim, or writing the best Saturdays of our lives. If you would answer that poll, we will tally all your answers and give you the results after the talk. And we're going to get right into it. Without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you Mark McCray.
All right. Hey, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. And can everyone hear me pretty good?
Yes, sir.
All right. Just bear with me a second. Okay. All right. So, yeah, so let me give you, first of all, I'm really super excited to be here. And I just want to give you a quick background about myself. I'm Mark McCray. I'm the author of The Best Saturdays of Our Lives, and I'm originally from the Bronx, New York. I've always had a passion for comic books and cartoons, as Matt said, and that passion led to me going to the New York Institute of Technology, where I studied radio and television communications. Upon graduation, I got a job at Group W Cable, which still exists. They are now known as Time Warner Cable. And I was there for a couple of years. I didn't exactly like the job I was doing, the positions I had rather, and left after a while and got a regular job that actually paid double than what the television gig was paying. And even though the non-television job paid more, there were no creative outlets. And so realizing that I probably made a career mistake and wanting to desperately get back into television, I launched the Best Saturdays of Our Lives newsletter. And I created the newsletter. I sent it around to everyone in the industry who touched kids' content at the time, including Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, DC and Marvel Comics. And after a while, the newsletter started to take off and led to me getting freelance jobs. And eventually, I started working at Cartoon Network. And, you know, so the newsletter really paid off. And then a few years after that, I decided to write a book to share some of my insights about being in the animation business. And so I took a lot of those old chapters and came up with up-to-date commentary for those chapters. And a lot of those insights are listed in the book. So today, especially, I want to talk about how it was for a lot of these animation directors back in the day that had limited budgets and still had to tell a story under challenging budgets and timeframes. And so I want everyone to sort of imagine a place where there's no streaming, no cable television, and that there's probably only 3 broadcast networks, and that you can probably only watch your favorite Saturday morning cartoons during Saturday between 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. So that's the world I'm going to introduce to you today. Some of the characters you see in the slide, we're going to show animated examples of some of those characters. Josefina Pussycats on top, the Herculoids, the Thundercats, the Jackson 5, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, and the Archies. So I know there are probably people in the room that watch Riverdale. Well, the Archies were the animated incarnation that was like a huge ratings hit back in the day. So we're going to show examples of animation clips, some of the shortcuts, as well as some of the cool things that some of these animation directors were able to do. Oops. All right. Let's see. All right, folks, I got to get back to the beginning of the slides. I thought I was, but apparently I was not. So just bear with me a second. All right. So first, let's talk about some of the players of the Saturday morning studios. First of all, with the collapse of the golden age of animation studios, a lot of major movie studios started shutting down their animation units in the late 50s because television was becoming popular. And a lot of these animators actually ended up leaving and forming their own companies. And one of those leaders was HannaBarbera, HannaBarbera Productions. They were the industry leader in studio, credited with making television animation a viable industry. They came up with the right amount of cells to use and how much animation a television production should have. Everyone has probably seen a HannaBarbera production, the Flintstones, Scooby Doo, the Smurfs. So they were really the industry leader. And one year in 1972, HannaBarbera actually sold 9 different series to 3 different networks. And I don't think that there's any other animation studio that has been able to brag about numbers like that. So they were the industry leaders. Next was Filmation Associates. They moved the industry needle by introducing new programming trends. They created the first ratings-driven superhero series, The New Adventures of Superman. In addition, they introduced the first African Americans to Saturday morning, the first live action superhero to Saturday morning, Shazam. If anybody watched the big screen version of Shazam, there was actually a Saturday morning live action version first, which was a huge hit and game changer. And then in the 1980s, Filmation created first run syndication for action shows such as He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. Next up is RankinBass Productions, also known as Videocraft Productions, known for their iconic holiday specials and stop motion animation. everyone in the room, I'm sure, has probably seen a RankinBass production. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the special that is shown every year for like 50 years plus, which still gets huge ratings, is a RankinBass production. The Thundercats is RankinBass also. They're a very diverse animation company. DFE, also known as the Patty Freeling, which was created by was created by Fritz Freeling, who was an award-winning director from Warner Brothers, and he teamed up with David DePatie to create the Patty Freeling films. So there was a period of time when Warner Brothers animation shut down in the 60s, and these guys decided to branch out on their own, and they took a lot of Warner Brothers animators with them, and they created their own studio. And there was a lot of new studios being created during this time. They're known for their out-of-the-box concepts, and they were also the company that helped Lucasfilms with its animation for the lightsaber in the very first Star Wars film. Rounding out the big five are Sid and Marty Krofft Pictures. Now, they were not an animation studio. They were the lone supplier for a while of live action and puppetry. And some of their hits include Land of the Lost and H.R. Pufnstuf. Other studios to note were J. Ward Productions, who came up with Rocky and Bullwinkle, Total Television, who created Underdog, Ruby Spears Productions. Now, Ruby Spears Productions were actually a spinoff of Hanna-Barbera, that first company that I described that created Scooby Doo and the Flintstones. And Joe Ruby and Ken Spears were actually part of the creation of Scooby Doo. And for a while, Ken Spears and I had correspondence, and we would talk back and forth, email each other, and he would tell me some of the secrets and nitty-gritty that was going on behind the scenes in television. Deke Enterprises was a late entry into the Saturday morning game. Probably their most favorite or famous character is Inspector Gadget. Right, Saturday morning budgets. Television ratings determine how much networks can charge advertisers. It's still that way today. That part of the formula has not changed. The revenue generated by advertising could not support full animation. And so limited animation became the industry standard for Saturday morning programming. This enabled studios to survive and make a profit margin, as well as the networks to be able to fill their schedules with cool Saturday morning shows and also generate revenue as well. All right, Saturday morning budgets from 1966. Space Ghost Dino Boy, the budget was $45,000 an episode. And so in 1966, that was the standard. All right, The New Adventures of Superman, which was produced by Filmation, they received $38,000. And the theory is because no one ever heard of Filmation, and the network just didn't want to give them the full network budget. They wanted to see what they can do. And so they did the series for $38,000. The Marvel Superheroes was syndicated and sold separately to each individual independent station, and that series was done for $28,000. However, all three shows proved to be pretty popular and forged the way for a whole bunch of superhero shows to come in the following season. So I'm going to stop here because I want to ask, what do you think of the three shows was the big breakout hit of 1966?
Here, folks, you should see that poll question on your screen again. What is it? What's it going to be? Space Ghost, Dino Boy, New Adventures of Superman, or the Marvel Superheroes?
All right. Shall I reveal the answer? All right, I figure everyone has clicked on the poll. So the winner is The New Adventures of Superman, which was done for less than Space Ghost. Superman was the huge game changer. I consider The New Adventures of Superman the big bang of Saturday morning television. It established that Saturday morning can be a revenue driver, just like primetime television. It got Filmation Associates in the game. They became a studio because this show was so successful. It brought in the big advertisers who wouldn't touch a superhero show simply because the numbers weren't there. But The New Adventures of Superman proved that people, or kids rather, wanted to watch superhero shows on Saturday morning. And lastly, the show helped elevate a young programming executive named Fred Silverman, who would go on to program CBS, ABC, and NBC. And he would be the first modern programmer to jump to all three networks. So The New Adventures of Superman was truly a game changer. And it also proves that even though Space Ghost was better animated and better executed than The New Adventures of Superman, kids preferred the content of Superman better. So sometimes it's not necessarily all about the bells and whistles. Content is king. All right, let's talk about the role of the animation director. Create the animated cartoon on time and on budget. That hasn't really changed a lot. And then determine which shortcuts to use, as well as move the story along. In this particular case, the animators had to figure out, how can I tell an interesting story with a limited budget, and what shortcuts do I use to be able to still have a decent looking cartoon? So we're going to talk about 3 different techniques, all right? The screen bounce technique. The impact of an offstage crash is complemented by the screen bouncing. So this is typical. Like, say, for example, a character crashes into a wall off screen and you don't see the crash, but the screen bounces. That's the most typical screen bounce that a lot of animators used. The next type was the screen bounce is complemented by a delayed reaction. So in that particular case, let's say that you're at a pool and you're hanging out with your friends, and your friend runs to go jump in the pool, and you turn around to see, but you actually miss him jumping in the pool, but you see the reaction of the splash. That would be a delayed reaction. A screen bounce is complemented by an on-screen reaction. And so again, a character crashes into the wall, or better yet, a car or a bicycle crashes into the wall. You don't see the crash is off screen, the screen bounces, but you see pieces of the bicycle fly onto the screen. And that lets you know that that bike is jacked up and there's no coming back from it. So that would be an example of an on-screen reaction. So we have a few cartoon clips coming up that show how animators accomplish this feat. The first will be from a series called Josefina Pussycats, based on the actual comic book from Archie Comics. This show premiered in the fall of 1970. Let's take a look.
He's the one.
Oh, thank you. Hey, help!
They've got Melody. Here, take my barbells, Alex. I'll go after him.
Gosh, you sure are brave, Alex. They can't move that silly weight.
It's all in a day's work.
Get this thing off us.
Let's not press my luck. Come on.
Do you see anything, Alexander?
The coast is clear.
Come on, we've got to sneak into that temple.
Count me out. I forgot my sneakers.
Oh, no, you don't. You're coming with us.
I'm not gonna go. I'm not gonna go. You can't make me.
He sure is strong for a chicken.
And slippery as an eel. I think we'd better try something else.
All right, so those were two examples of the classic screen bounce. In the first example, Alexander was rolling around on the in the weight room. You hear this gigantic crash, the screen bounces, then they cut to the hole in the wall and the screen is still bouncing. In the second scene, Valerie and Melody are trying to pull Alex from the car, and they end up taking his shoes off and flying into a tree, and you hear the screen, you see the screen bounce. So that was a typical example of a screen bounce, so that the animators didn't necessarily have to show those characters crashing into a tree. Next up is a screen bounce technique with a delayed reaction. And so this clip is from the original Sabrina the Teenage Witch, which was created in 1969. It was part of the Archie Comedy Hour. And I'm actually working on a blog which can tie this particular series to the Netflix series. This show has a lot of subversive moments in it, which will have to be for another presentation. But let's look at a delayed reaction. Remember that example I talked about with the friend jumping in the pool, and the friend misses him actually jumping in, but he sees the reaction of the splash. So it's going to be a similar scene like this animation-wise. Let's take a look.
Wow, for an old geezer, Pop really packs a punch. He landed on me like a ton of bricks.
Oh, dear.
Phew. Looks like this is going to be one of those days. I think I'll go straight home before anything else happens.
All right, in that particular scene, well, first let me give you the setup. Aunt Hilda has put a curse on poor Jughead, and so that every time he says something, it manifests and tries to, I guess, kill him. Anyway, so Sabrina's there to make sure that he stays safe. So when the wall came crashing down, you saw the screen bounce, and then you saw the smoke rise up. And so if someone was walking down the street and actually saw that happen, the smoke rising up was to let you know that that brick wall just crashed, and the smoke represents the result of the brick wall actually hitting the street. So that's an example of a delayed reaction. Let's see and watch a screen bounce with an on-screen reaction. So this was the example I gave you about a character crashing into a wall off screen, but you see pieces of his bicycle fly onto the screen. This clip is from The Atom, which was part of the Superman Aquaman Hour of Adventure, the #1 show from 1967, which featured a lot of the Justice League characters. And so the Atom is like Ant-Man. He can shrink down, but he has the strength of a full-grown person. Let's check it out and look for the on-screen reaction in this scene.
Stop! Stay where you are! This bulb is loaded with powerful explosives. Take one more step and...
Let's sick him, Kitty! Got it! Yes, sir! Just as soon as the Coast Guard gets here.
Yeah, so the Atom knocks the villain into the flower pots. The flower, he hits the ground, there's a slight bounce, and you see the flower pot fly into the screen. And that lets you know that he fell onto a bunch of flower pots. Director Bruce Timm, who created Batman the Animated Series, he has used this technique to a certain extent. All right, so the next type of shortcut we're going to talk about is the over-the-shoulder dialogue shortcut. All right, and so this was an over-the-shoulder shot that you see here that features a character talking to another character, but there's not a lot of lip flap, or you don't really see their jaw exactly moving. And what the animators do, they put in a little bit of a distraction. Something is moving, but it's not their mouths or jaw. But when you watch the scene, just look carefully at what is moving to sort of distract you from the fact that their mouth is not moving. Let's check it out.
Hit it, Foo-Foo.
Say, she's good. You can say that again.
She sure is light on her paws. Atta girl, Foo-Foo.
Foo-foo-foogie.
Now get this, Sam. Foo-Foo will now impersonate Rita LaLure in a dramatic scene from her latest motion picture.
Well, that wraps up this mystery. Let's head for the malt shop.
What are we gonna do with old, tall, dark, and dummy?
Like I got an idea.
Huh?
All right. So in both of those scenes, the animation director used different choices. And so in the first scene, a clip from the Archies, when Veronica is talking in that over-the-shoulder shot, the only thing that's moving around is that eyelash back and forth. And that is supposed to distract the viewer over the fact that you're not seeing that jaw move a lot or at all. In the second clip that featured the kids from Scooby Doo, Velma is moving her head and her arm, but the jaw part isn't really moving at all. And again, that's a distraction and a shortcut to still be able to tell the story, but to save a little bit on your animation budget. All right, so this section of the presentation I love. I call it action distraction. This is when there's so much action going on that you don't realize that there's a shortcut happening right in front of you. So be prepared, because it's going to be, I'm going to ask you what the shortcut was. All right, so before we get started, I want to introduce the characters. On the right, that's Valerie Smith. She was the first African-American character to show up on Saturday morning, part of Josefina Pussycats. That's Josie on the right. And in the back, not looking too pleased, is Alexandra Cabot, who just found out that she's getting kicked out of Josie and the Pussycats. And Alexandra was a real hater. But not so much about Alexandra. Let's check out the clip and just pay attention to the quick sequence of events and see if you can figure out what the shortcut was in the scene.
Now that we're all together again, let's get out of this kooky weed factory.
I'll second that motion. It's the prisoners! After them!
Let's swing out of here.
It's a good thing this boat broke our fall, or we would have gotten all wet.
All right, so here's what I will tell you, just to give you a clue. Yes, this scene does use some of the techniques we talked about in the earlier part of the presentation. You know, there's a crash and there's a delayed reaction. When the kids fall in the boat and you see the boat rocking, that's a delayed reaction. All right, you know that they just fell into that boat because it's rocking, but that's not what the shortcut is. So does anyone want to guess what it is? I'm going to let you guys, I'm going to show you in the next slide, but I'm just curious if anyone has an idea.
Yeah, folks, what do you think? Which one of those techniques are we looking at?
All right, I'm gonna go to the next slide and I'm going to actually show you guys what it is.
Now that we're all together again, let's get out of this kooky weed factory.
I'll second that motion. It's the prisoners! After them!
Let's swing.
All right, so here was the shortcut. Valerie is drawn behind Alan, who's in the front. They're only animating her arms and her legs, all right? They're not animating her head or torso. And because the scene takes place in 5 minutes and it's danger and excitement, from a viewing standpoint, you don't even notice that Valerie is partially hidden. So this was another technique that animators used to save on the
out of here.
It's a good thing this boat broke our fall, or we would have gotten all wet.
This is another technique that animators use to save on the budget that didn't necessarily sacrifice story. And because there was so much excitement going on, as a viewer, you didn't notice. Now, I have to tell you, I've been a fan of Josie and the Pussycats from the very beginning. And I only discovered this little shortcut about 3 years ago. So very clever. And so, of course, I had to watch all the other episodes, and it sort of happens a lot, especially during the chase sequences. All right, so here's another action distraction scene. And what I can tell you is that nobody disappears, but there is a shortcut or something in this particular scene. And I want you to check it out and see if you can figure it out.
Attack! Attack!
No time to explain, fellas. Here come the shock troops. You run interference for him, Screel, while I hold off the troops with my repello ray.
Destroy him! Pythorex commands it!
Tell your pal Pythorex I've got other ideas, old buddy.
All right, anybody want to take a guess? I kind of feel like this sequence is a little more obvious as to what's going on, what the animation director did to extend the scene.
If you have a guess, drop it right into that Q&A box.
All right, so what was happening was that they used a bunch of recycled scenes to keep the action going. So after Hawkman flies around the first time and attacks the aliens, about 7 seconds later, they put in new animation, and then they recycle the scene where he's attacking the same aliens once again. And the difference is about maybe 6 or 7 seconds of the repeated shot. But from a psychological point of view, a lot of times kids didn't notice because the astronauts are being rescued and they're no longer in danger. So you're not even thinking about the attack that's going on. So next I'm going to show another recycled scene that I think is done a little bit better and is a little harder to notice. Let's take a look. This is from RankinBass, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer people that I mentioned before. This is the Jackson 5 cartoon.
Come on, you guys, bug off. Take a hike, get lost. Hey, Tito, can't you get any more speed into this old Tin Lizzy?
Get off my car, man. I got my foot on the floor now.
Knock it off with the horn, Mac. Can't you see I'm...
Yipe!
Oh, stop thief! Come back here with my circus!
All right, so in that particular case, the repeated scene actually happens about a minute later. And what the animation director cleverly did, instead of the Jackson 5 being chased in a vehicle by the elephants, all he did was substitute the person that was at the stop sign being chased by the elephants. The elephants are still running in the same sequence. Even the smoke coming out of the other guy's car is the same as the Jackson 5. All that is repeated a minute later, but by inserting a different character and the fact that the Jacksons are no longer in danger, it's not something that you would notice. It's not as noticeable. And I think that for a lot of animation directors that had to do a recycle scene or repeat a scene, if they had to do it, the best way to repeat a scene, if it has to be done, the scene should be separated by some distance. Like 6 seconds is probably a little too short. A minute, you probably can get away with it. All right, so we talked about some of the shortcuts. Let's talk about some of the cool things that a lot of the animation directors were able to do, which I call 5 to 10 seconds at a time. So again, like I said, a lot of these animation directors were up against limited budgets, and they had to figure out how to tell a story, but they also wanted to show what they could do within 5 to 10 seconds at a time, even though they couldn't necessarily blow their budgets. So let's take a look at some of these examples. But before we get into this, I want to talk about the Fantastic Four. So this cover from Fantastic Four 3 was created, the artwork is from Jack the King Kirby, who along with Stan Lee created the Fantastic Four and Thor and Captain America and so many other great Marvel superheroes. And Jack Kirby has influenced so many artists. And I believe part of his genius is the fact that he can insert himself into the mind of a superhero. And the reason I love this cover so much is because I feel like the Human Torch really makes the cover. You know, as far as I know, Jack Kirby was not an Olympic diver, all right? But the way that he drew the Human Torch, just flying around and having fun, is not a typical way to draw a superhero. But in this particular instance, the Human Torch was a young superhero. I think at this time he was either a teenager or a young adult. And he's thinking, well, this guy's kind of free-minded. Why would I draw him in the traditional way that superheroes fly? He's having fun, obviously, you know, much to the chagrin of the thing that has his hand out. But to me, this shows an artist getting into a character's head and using his imagination. So the next clip I'm going to show you is an animation director getting into the Flash's head. Let's take a look. Oh, okay.
Activate Magno's armament! Hurry!
Okay, I gotta stop. Here's why I love that sequence, all right? So what the animation director did basically was think, I'm the Flash. I'm charging towards the danger, and now beams are being fired at me. If I turn around and try to run the other way, a beam might strike me and hit me in the head or something. But the animation director thought about the fact that I'm the Flash. I can run backwards and still keep my eye on the beam. And he runs backwards, he assesses the situation, and then he runs forward. And so if I wasn't in a Zoom meeting, I would actually demonstrate other reasons why I think it's cool, but I just have to tell you. So for example, if you are a fan of basketball, whether it's high school or the NBA, you know, like when a basketball player makes that shot and then he does that backwards trot, like I'm cool, I made a shot, I scored. It's the same running sequence. Like when the Flash is running backwards, that animation looks like someone who's really running backwards fast. And so he's running forward, running back, and then running forward again. And it's 3 different poses, and it's like 10 seconds or 15 seconds. And the animation director really thought about that scene a lot. And I have watched a dozen versions of The Flash by other animators since that clip has aired. And I feel like a lot of the animation directors now that have the bells and whistles, because they do, they don't really think that deep about how a character could move. And this animation director said, look, I only got 10 seconds to make the Flash do something cool. And he did it and accomplished it. And that's why I love that scene so much. All right, more animation goodness, 5 to 10 seconds at a time. This family is the Herculoids. So think about Tarzan in space, and he has control of the animals, although these animals can kind of think of on their own. And they live on this planet where every villain in the world tries to invade. And boy, are they sorry when they tangle with the Herculoids. So let's take a look at some cool action from the Herculoids.
They're getting away!
Oh no! Turn! Right on target, Eagle!
Woo! Boy, were those aliens really sorry. So let's look at the two clips. The first clip I just love, and I really wanted to have in this presentation because when Igloo the rock ape jumps into that ship and is really told from the alien's perspective in his spaceship, when those feet come flying through, you know it's a wrap. But more importantly, those feet almost look 3D. They're so huge. They're just popping through the screen. And you didn't see a lot of animation like that back in 1967. The second scene, which also takes place in the same cartoon and the same story, when Igloo again uses one of the Herculoid creatures as a slingshot, and they toss that giant rock to onto another spaceship. And again, you kind of see things from the alien's perspective. I mean, when that boulder is coming and he's telling his folks to turn the ship, he actually gets cut off. And then there's this huge explosion. Now, the animation director just could have left it right there. The ship exploded and that's the end of the story. But instead, after that huge explosion, you see the ship heading down, and it's heading down pretty fast. And the smoke is billowing out of the ship. And as the ship gets down to the tar pits, the smoke is still billowing, but it's slowing down because it's a wrap. It's all over. And a lot of times when an alien ship crashed, there was no smoke that was billowing out in a 1967 cartoon. And so the director actually went through the effort to actually make that crash a lot more dramatic. And that's what makes that scene work in that particular cartoon, that the director thought about what else I can do beyond the explosion to make this spaceship crash look really cool. All right, more animation goodness. And so this is another example of an alien ship going down too, but it's done in a different way. So let's check it out. Let's take a look. So I can tell you right now that it's like probably the best example of a continuous shot, which you didn't see a lot of back in 1967. This is from a Justice League cartoon called Target Earth.
Order retreat!
Too late! We're hit!
Plummeting earthward, the command craft is picked up on monitors in Hawkman's orbiting spaceship.
Attention, Flash and Adam. Invader ship approaching.
All right, I just love this scene too, because it's a continuous shot. You see the spaceship going down at one speed, and then all of a sudden, Hawkman's spaceship just flies into the frame at a completely different speed and out of the frame, and then the camera moves really quickly to catch it and almost like adjust itself so that you can see Hawkman's ship. And it's done so fast. And what makes this scene so cool is that they could have done it so many ways. Typically how it's done, a spaceship flies out of the frame from left to right, and then from right to left, you see another spaceship flying into the frame of the picture. But that's kind of boring, you know? And this animation director wanted to give Hawkman's ship a dramatic entrance, and he does it. In fact, let's go back, let's look at it because it just happens really quickly. So you can see how fast it is, and just pay attention to the camera work.
Order retreat!
Too late! We're hit!
Plummeting earthward, the command craft is picked up on monitors in Hawkman's orbiting spaceship.
Attention, Flash and Adam. Invader ship approaching.
Yeah, so it's pretty fast, and a scene like that was pretty expensive to do back in 1967. You know, because like I said, there were other ways that they could have done it much cheaper. But again, the animation director wanted to give Hawkman's ship an entrance. And it also, the scene also kind of symbolizes what a lot of people say in corporate America. The people you meet on the way up are the ones you meet on the way down. The aliens are going down and the superheroes are winning and they're going up. Some more animation goodness. All right, so here's the deal with Scooby Doo, Where Are You? So Scooby Doo came out, part of Scooby Doo's influence for becoming a series was because the Archies had broke all type of ratings records the year before. And the story is that during the pitch season at CBS, Fred Silverman told the HannaBarbera representatives to put Archie in a haunted house. And Ken Spears, who I said earlier, I used to share email correspondence. He wouldn't exactly come out and say that Scooby was based on the Archies. He did say that Scooby Doo was supposed to be a musical group in the beginning, and then they dropped that. But I'm saying all this to say that there wasn't a whole lot of teenage fun happening on Scooby because they were busy chasing mysteries. But in season 2, the last episode of season 2, the animation director decided to have a little bit of fun with Scooby and to show that they are typical teenagers and they can have fun. And so they put together this sequence.
That was a clever idea you had, Shaggy.
Yeah, like Scoob needed a dance partner, and he couldn't have gotten a better one.
I gotta admit, Scoob has style.
Yeah, he's all over the floor.
All right. So yeah, the animation is on a loop, all right? But the characters are moving pretty smooth around, and you didn't see a lot of sequences like that in Scooby Doo. And it was like the last episode from season 2, and it's obvious that the director wanted Scooby Doo to go out with a bang and to animate something cool. More animation goodness. This gem I discovered about 4 years ago while I was watching some DVD commentary. And also, actually, I discovered this a little longer than that. I was actually working on my book when I found this out. So this series is from 1987. It's called BraveStarr. It's about a Native American Indian that fights justice in the future. And the series has Native American directors and writers and voiceover folks. And this sequence is actually a 3D, a digital scene. It's only 5 seconds, but I was just shocked that a Saturday morning company was doing any type of digital animation back in 1987. And so I originally showed this clip in Professor Sandro's class, History of Animation class, and one of the kids said to me, I thought it was a cool scene, but the talking horse distracted me. So I'm just giving everyone fair warning. There is a talking horse in the scene, but it's 5 seconds of a digital scene from 1987. So let's check it out.
Gal is quite a lady.
Yep, that's it. So once I found this out, it turns out, I was friends with the director, and I said to him, if you can just send me just a quick description of what it was like to animate a digital scene back in 1987. So in the BraveStarr chapter of my book, he talks about what that experience was like. And there was also a BraveStarr theatrical movie where they also used more instances of 3D digital animation as well. So that worked out really good. But I can tell you that it was very difficult to do that type of animation back in the day. And when I originally saw it, as a fan, you know, years before I even wrote the book, I just thought it was a fully animated scene. But it was not. It was better than that. It was something digital. All right, more of the good stuff. So in the early 80s, and I mentioned this before, Filmation Associates, and they are now known as Filmation Productions, a lot of companies abandoned Saturday morning, all right, because all of a sudden, syndication was really popping in the 1980s. If anyone in the room, if you're fans of the Disney afternoon, the reason there was a Disney afternoon was because in the 1980s, all of a sudden, there was this huge programming trend to have brand new cartoons in the afternoon. And it was a good thing for animation companies because they didn't have a network overseeing any of the stories or suggesting that they add in a sidekick, and they were able to get more bang for their buck animation-wise. And so the sequences I'm going to show you is, the first one is going to be from He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, which combines 2D animation along with some He-Man being, oh my gosh, having a brain fart here. Anyway, it's 2D and He-Man is being, oh my goodness, rotoscoped. That's what I was trying to say. Sorry, folks. I just had retro in my head and I couldn't think of the scope part. Anyway, you know, so what Filmation did, they took a live action person, a live action bodybuilder, filmed him doing action sequences, and then they traced over his movements and, you know, made it for animation. So the scene combines new animation with rotoscope. It's a really good combination of the two in this particular scene. And then for the Thundercats, I'm going to show the Thundercats open, which is considered one of the best opens from the 1980s. And I can tell you, I can assure you, if these two shows had been done on Saturday morning, the sequences, the scenes that I'm about to show you would not look this great. So let's take a quick look.
No time, I've got to jump.
It's just awesome. Oh my gosh, I just love that open. It does go on for quite some time, but it's really, really awesome. Awesome and excellent. And you know, when Thundercats came out, a lot of people were surprised that it was RankinBass that came out with this show because they weren't known for doing superhero programming. But RankinBass also did a Lord of the Rings animated feature film. And that's pretty awesome as well. So they really shouldn't have been that much of a surprise, excuse me, or disconnect. The end of Saturday morning television. So by the mid-1990s, Saturday morning programming was in decline. The 1990 Children's Television Act, which is still in effect today, required networks to air 3 hours of educational programming. And so if you watch a local Fox affiliate, that educational programming might be something like animal rescue or pet adoption. Anything that shows any type of educational aspects in the story is considered educational. All right, so the act came out in 1990, but the law didn't really gain any teeth until about 1996. And so networks were getting away with a lot. They were showing, you know, like a series like The Jetsons and saying that it takes place in the future and it's educational, and that was not the case. Commercial time was cut from 16 minutes to 10 minutes. And so remember earlier in the presentation, I said that, you know, networks charging advertisers were pretty much their bread and butter. And so now they're making less money, all right? And the standard now for an average animated series on a broadcast or cable television is about 21 minutes and 20 seconds. So this also sort of cut into the networks generating revenue. And then in 1992, NBC becomes the first network to drop out of the kids market. All right, they decided that they can make more money by creating a Saturday morning version of the Today Show, which still airs on Saturday morning. Now, this would have probably created a power vacuum because that only left ABC and CBS, but also around the same time, Fox Kids got into the game and they introduced the new X-Men series and Power Rangers, and it was a wrap. The legacy of Saturday morning television inspired a generation of fans like myself in spite of animation limitations. I was super inspired to want to work in the kids industry, to work in programming because of all those awesome Saturday morning shows that I saw over the years. 24-hour kid networks such as Cartoon Network was launched with strong classic programming thanks to the Hanna-Barbera library. Remember, I mentioned to you that one year Hanna-Barbera sold 9 different shows to 3 different networks. They were a huge studio. They had pretty deep pockets. And I believe the following year they sold 8 different series. And they were also selling shows in the syndication market as well. And the fact that a network could just launch just based on their library is pretty incredible. The men and women who worked in the limited animation era kept the industry going and passed the baton on to the next generation of animation directors and content creators, people like yourselves. All right, if you want to order a copy of my book, you can go to my website, tbsool.com, which is the initials of the book. You can follow me on Twitter at Mark McTeesoul. And as Matt mentioned earlier, we have a podcast. It's on SoundCloud. It's also on iTunes. And we usually try to drop a new podcast episode every 2 weeks, usually on a Wednesday. Or you can go to my Facebook page, the Mark McCray Facebook page, and you can get information on my podcast there as well. And that is the end of my presentation. I hope you folks enjoyed.
Folks, let's give a big cyber round of applause wherever you are for Mark McCray and this awesome presentation. Mark, thank you. And we've got some great questions showing up already.
Okay, cool.
I want to start with Sam. You've got a good one up there. The question Sam asks Mark is, do you believe the death of Saturday morning cartoons is also the reason we have little to no action cartoons on television today?
I don't think that one has anything to do with the other. What I think is happening with a lot of the action shows, the superhero series, is that they don't repeat as well. So when you have a 24-hour network or even a streaming service, people don't, once they watch those episodes, they don't ever want to watch them again. And a lot of the superhero cartoons might cost a little bit more to air. And unless it's an established property, you know, maybe a DC Marvel established property, if it's something new or fresh out of the box, some networks are definitely not too keen on running a superhero series. I'm a huge superhero fan. And I wish there was more superhero or action shows on, but the reality is ratings wise, it sometimes they just don't do as well.
Mark, we've got a really good one from Sammy, who writes, this is a tough one. This is really going to test your encyclopedic knowledge of Saturday morning cartoons. What were the first words ever uttered in a Saturday morning cartoon, if you know?
Oh my gosh. Well, I don't know, all right? I can tell you that because here's the reason. Saturday morning has been around since the 1950s. It was a dumping ground for the networks to fill space. And so one of the first things that the networks did was that they bought the theatrical libraries from Warner Brothers, and that's how, you know, your Bugs Bunny characters got on the air. So these cartoons were already being shown in the theaters. The same thing happened with Terry Toons and Mighty Mouse cartoons. They were also being shown on Saturday morning. So the first Saturday morning shows were actually old classic cartoons that networks were being used to fill space on Saturday morning. But that all changed in 1966 when Superman arrived and everyone's like, wow, this can actually be a real business. But I have no way of knowing. I can tell you that Mighty Mouse was probably one of the first theatrical cartoons to show up on Saturday morning in the 1950s, but there isn't a record of what that first cartoon was.
Well, I've got a really good one. Actually, I have two here, one from Julia, one from William. I think we're going to do Julia's first. Julia asks, and this is a question I was going to ask you as well, Mark. This is, I think a lot of us have this on our minds. What do you think of the cartoons that are kind of remakes or reboots of classic Saturday morning shows like She-Ra, Princess of Power, and the rumor of the Thundercats remake? What do you think?
Okay, all right. So here's the thing. I'm a fan of the multiverse, all right? So that means that I can accept different versions of characters and not explode. I'm also a fanboy too, and so to say what I just said is not typically what a lot of fanboys think. It has to be pure, it has to be whatever. I just finished watching She-Ra, and let me tell you, it's so beyond. It is so beyond the original series. And I'm a huge fan of the original series too, by the way. But I think some of the choices that the creators made with the new She-Ra series was just so on point. And they just took that story and those characters places that I just didn't think they would go. And I just think that it was a really, really great adaptation. Now, in terms of Thundercats, Roar, I know the internet is really beating up that show really bad, but I actually like it. I think it's funny. And in the first episode, when they land on the new Earth, you know, they're complaining about how there's nothing on the planet, and they're making jokes about it. And, you know, I kind of felt like some of those questions should have been answered in the original Thundercats series. You know, I also like the fact that they are using scoring from the original Thundercats series to give, you know, viewers, you know, a little bit of something familiar with the reboot. But Teen Titans Go, I love that show too. I kind of feel like Teen Titans Go and Teen Titans Original, they're just mutually exclusive, different shows. And one is serious and one is jokey. And I think what saves Teen Titans Go is the fact that they have the original voice cast. I think that's what really helped make that show successful. But I'm not one of these people that's like, it has to be something similar to what I remember. I feel like if the ideas are still good, then whatever that reboot's going to be is going to be a success.
Isn't that refreshing to hear? I wish more fans, because I know what you mean. We say air quote fans. There tends to be this very angry, nitpicky. I like just saying, look, it's all part of the multiverse. That's right. A great attitude. Let me ask you something. This is a great question from William. William asks, how do you feel about the vast amount of animated shows coming out on Netflix? And do you think that's a platform for more action content later in his lifetime? And Mark, this is a great question, especially considering that all these live productions have kind of said, oh, what's going on with COVID? What's going on with quarantine? Meanwhile, the animation industry, there was about a 1 or 2 week period in March where they said, what are we going to do? Went to remote working and then just kept chugging away. So we might even be getting more and more animated content in the future. Yes? What do you think about that?
Well, I think that, first of all, there is a series that is a live action show. It's a Norman Lear series. I want to say One Life to Live, but I know One Day at a Time is the name of it. And they are
Saturday morning cartoon version of One Life.
Right. They're doing an animated. That's how they sort of got around the whole production issue. They decided, someone thought really quick on their feet and said, hey, let's do an animated half hour of One Day at a Time. And I just thought that was such a brilliant idea. And I think in terms of action, I think the jury's still out on Netflix. I don't know. There's a lot of action shows on Netflix. And I mean, like when I go through and I'm, looking for content to watch, I really feel like, wow, there's a lot of great choices here. But I don't know if any of those shows are necessarily a breakout yet. I don't hear anyone really talking about, other than She-Ra was obviously just awesome, but I'm not hearing anything about some of the separate anime shows. There's a ton of anime shows on Netflix, and I'm not hearing anything from the streets about those series being like this phenomenal breakout. So I feel like the jury is still out on action and Netflix, but I also feel like it's a great platform for people to watch their action shows one behind the other, especially if it's an anime series, which, I feel like the whole streaming platform really would fit an anime show even better than, traditional action shows. So,
and we can expand that question because we had a few folks ask something similar. Jatil Tillman asks, and Jatil, forgive me if I'm not saying that name correctly, but Jatil Tillman asks if we might see these things on other services like Disney Plus, like any of those other streaming platforms. Do you feel like this is good for Saturday morning content?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think at this point, like what networks are probably trying to figure out is, okay, well, does the action show start on our platform or does it start on the traditional network? Depending on what the show is or what the series is. And so I kind of feel like there's not going to be a lot of exclusive stuff necessarily on a Disney Plus because they do have the mothership network. There's still the Disney Channel. There's still XD. And, at the end of the day, television, traditional television, cable television still pays the bills. There's still a lot of revenue generated from advertising. And as well as subscriptions, even though there's a lot of cord cutting going on. At the end of the day, until Disney Plus or similar services actually, onboard more subscribers, I feel like I probably could answer that question better in 2 or 3 years. It might be a situation where if there's more subscribers going to Disney Plus than maybe the mother network, then maybe the people in charge might say, well, this show is only going to be on streaming, or this is going to be a streaming exclusive, and we're not going to put it on traditional networks. We want people to actually have to pay to see this particular show. And so people are still trying to figure out the strategy of streaming and shows and cartoons and animation. So it's going to be interesting to see how things go.
We've got a really good closing question here from Mary Batiata, who has a question. And this is something I was going to ask as well, Mark. Do you have a go-to platform or network for watching really early animation and cartoons? The earliest pieces of it that you can find on YouTube tend to be pretty chopped up, of course, lots of ads, not always great quality. When you're looking for something really old, where do you go? And we've got to clarify really old, because I find when my students say really old, they could be talking about 1990. But If we're looking, where do you go to watch a lot of these older shows, Mark?
There's a couple of websites. I want to say that they may be illegal websites. I actually can't think of the name of one of them right now, but there is a show called that someone from the podcast actually told me about. My partner from the podcast, Dan Klink, told me about this show. It's a Deke show that was made in the 1980s, and it has something to do with treasures and gold, and I just can't recall the name. But when I go to that particular site, it has like a whole library of older content. I'm sorry, I just can't think of the name of the site.
Look, they can hit you up on Twitter for that. Well, let me. I have an alternate final question from Victoria, because this is a great one. I don't think I've ever asked you this, Mark. Is there a cartoon that you wish would be remade or rebooted?
Yes. All right. So there's a cartoon called The Amazing Chan and the Chan Clan. And it's the adventures of Charlie Chan, who's the detective, who is based on a real Asian American cop that operated in Hawaii. And it was a HannaBarbera production in 1973. The animation was done in Australia. They had partnered with a studio in Australia. And Charlie Chan has 10 kids. And the original show, what I love about it is, even though it was done by HannaBarbera, the team that brought Scooby Doo, The Amazing Chan and the Chan Clan, with all those speaking parts and all those kids, they made it, the story was still really interesting. And I feel like it would make a great anime version for the modern era, for that show to be redone. And they were also a singing group as well. I'm not sure if the singing part needs to be in there, but I feel like The Amazing Chan and the Chan Clan would be a great remake for a new cartoon. And I have friends that work at Warner Brothers, and of course I have floated some of these ideas, and they're like, no.
Yeah, that's something, Mark. You're all these studios. For all we know, this could be underway. I mean,
right.
We've actually seen so many studios sort of kicking off projects. Do you think a lot of this has to do with COVID concerns? Why animation's been doing fairly well given all that's going on here? I mean,
I think that
exploding new content. What do you think?
I think that, because of COVID, there's definitely going to be, I agree with you, it was sort of like what are we going to do? And it actually affected what was happening on Adult Swim. We have a Toonami block that airs on Saturday night. And, we had to, make some changes to the schedule, but now we're rolling along like nothing happened. And what's really cool is that some of the voice actors were able to, still record their parts and keep things moving. But I think that animation is going to have to be an alternative until some of the productions can get up and running.
Yeah.
And I think it's really cool that animation might be the solve, or that type of content saves the day, until live action can, get back on its feet again.
Yeah, because we've been working like this forever. Zoom meetings with people overseas, and this is not new territory for us.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mark, thank you so much. Folks, please, once again, join me in offering a big cyber round of applause right now to Mr. Mark McCray for this. Mark, thank you. And folks, thanks for joining us. Again, check out Mark's podcast if you like this subject. If you're interested in Saturday morning cartoons, the book is outstanding. There's some shows you would not believe existed when you go through the catalog of what was on the air during the golden era of Saturday morning. And folks, thanks for joining us. And of course, tomorrow at 3 p.m., I just want to remind everybody, at 3 p.m. tomorrow, we're going to be discussing creativity with the great Andre 3000. So maybe we'll see you there for Guests and Gusto. Thank you very much. Have a great week.
All right.
We'll see you soon. Mark, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. It was awesome.